Venezuelans have ruined New York City. Is that true? Well, today we discuss.
Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, venezuelainsider.com.
So today we are going to answer if is it true that Venezuelan migrants that have arrived recently to the Big Apple, to New York City, New York, in the United States. There are several thousands of Venezuelans that have migrated to the United States, of course, but a very significant portion of them have arrived to New York City. And today, this particular discussion will be based on a video reaction yet again, and this time comes from Diego Saúl Reina. That is a very important content creator. He is Mexican-Canadian, and in his particular platform, he discusses different topics regarding migration, economics, cost of living. Usually this content is for Latin migrants and mostly in Canada, but this time he's addressing the issue in the United States, in Mexico City, regarding Venezuelans. First, according to Diego, Venezuelans have to leave. This is his particular response, his particular opinion, that Venezuelans have to leave. They have to leave Venezuela. And I don't agree completely, but I understand why he says that. Also, Diego mentions that according to the United States and the United States government, the current president, Nicolás Maduro, he is a dictator. And that's his words, and I could understand why. He first starts talking about the logistics of going from Venezuela to the United States for a typical migrant. And he discusses that it's a very expensive trip. And this is my particular opinion. It's not as expensive. The issue is, of course, he mentions that there are right now not direct available flights from Venezuela to the United States. There are some sort of, let's say, loopholes over there. So the legality is difficult, but the biggest issue, and this is my opinion, but Diego mentioned this particular thing as well, is that most Venezuelans, especially the ones who want to migrate to the United States, they don't have a tourist visa. They don't have any sort of visa, any kind of visa in order to migrate legally to the United States. And getting a tourist visa for a Venezuelan is very, very difficult. First, there is no embassy, the U.S. embassy within Venezuela, so you have to travel to a third country, a very expensive errand to run, and also you have to go, depending, there is suspicacity regarding getting a tourist visa in the United States. First is you have to pay the trip to a third country, and this particular third country, usually Venezuelans, for the U.S. authorities, are looked down upon, and it's very tricky to get a tourist visa in it. And of course, a migrant that usually is on a more precarious economic situation is going to have more trouble in order to get such visa. Very good. Afterwards, you have to take into account that most countries in Central America and Mexico, they require visas for Venezuelans. And because the second route that they use is that they usually go to, let's say, Mexico, when until recently, just a few years ago, Venezuelans can travel visa-free to Mexico, and that changed, of course. Now you have to go more south to the continent in order to reach the United States. So right now, the migration route for Venezuelans is they have to reach usually Colombia. So you have to reach Colombia if you are a Venezuelan migrant. You have to reach Colombia, then cross the northern part of Colombia to Panama using the Darien Gap. The Darien Gap is this particular jungle that connects Colombia and Panama. Is a very, of course, difficult place to navigate. It's a jungle. Also, allegedly, some irregular criminal gangs and groups are over there. So it's a very dreadful process going through the Darien Gap. And afterwards, you have to keep climbing up the continent, going throughout Honduras, Guatemala, and many different countries until you reach the southern Mexican border. And then in Mexico, you have to cross to the U.S. southern border, and it's a very dreadful, tiresome, and expensive process. Now, Diego explains that in order, usually, of course, the Venezuelan migrants that take this particular route are the most impoverished ones. It's not like the Venezuelan middle class is doing so. I heard a couple of cases, by the way, but the Venezuelan middle class is not doing this. Is the more, the Venezuelans on a more dire situation, but most of them actually come from third countries, like Peru, Chile, Colombia, places like that. Very good. So in order to get the funds, in order to finance this dangerous endeavor, is that I heard this couple of cases that they get loans. I mean, they get financing from an acquaintance, someone like that, because the process costs between $5,000, $10,000. You have to pay for the whole trip, walking, sometimes even months, throughout Central America, going via the Darien Gap, at the end reaching Mexico, and also apparently you have to pay a coyote. A coyote is this particular people that work in Mexico on the southern border of the United States and help crossing the migrants and all that process. So this particular process is, of course, dreadful, is expensive, and also they usually owe money on their home country, of course, in Venezuela, but also could be on a third country like Peru or Chile. At the end, when you are able to reach the United States, and not everyone is able to make the whole trip, you have to go through the legal process. Apparently, it's legal to arrive to the United States. You apply for asylum or refugee status of a similar process of that nature, a legal process in the United States. So you have to register something of that nature. And afterwards, depending on the particular case of the Venezuelan, the one who already has a family member or a friend or a close friend, what they do is of course, they reach this particular friend's home. But the ones that they don't have a close family member in the United States, they have to, from scratch, look for a small place to rent, a bedroom, something of that nature. But for many, not for all, but for many migrants, when they reach New York, they have these particular accommodations that are paid by the state, the city of New York, of course, using the taxpayers' money. Now, let's go with their working situation. This is very tricky. When they reach let's say in this particular case, New York, apparently not everyone has a legal status, the work permit in order to legally work in the United States, in this particular case, New York City. And of course, if you have been in New York, you're from the United States, you know that New York is one of the most expensive cities, not only in the US, but in the entire world. So it's very expensive to make ends meet over there. Of course, they have their particular location. And apparently they have a couple of meals, this particular cohort of Venezuelan migrants that arrive in New York City. But afterwards, you still have to pay all the money that you own. You have to pay on Venezuela or other country in Latin America, with particular migrants, $5,000 to $10,000. That's kind of the ballpark number. So you have to start working from day one in order to send money to Venezuela or another Latin country. Very good. Now, the options in order to work as a migrant that still doesn't have full documents, they are legal migrants, by the way. The people from the United States have to know this. They have a legal status in the United States, but still they don't have the working permit. And that's, of course, bureaucracy from the United States. So we're seeing here. Well, afterwards, the only job that they are able to get, most cases, is working as food delivery in these particular platforms like DoorDash, Grubhub, Uber Eats, that kind of stuff. However, in order to work on this particular places, on these particular applications, these particular platforms, you need a legal presence like a social security number and a U.S. bank account that can suffer. Of course, you are arriving, you don't have still your particular documents in hand, and you don't have a U.S. bank account. So what ends up happening is that they have to rent these particular platforms from a third person that already has social security number and a U.S. bank account. Very good. In order to start working in this particular place. And of course, you need transportation in order to do this particular job. Either a motorcycle, a bicycle of this or also these particular electric bicycles that you have in New York and other places in the United States, and actually in the world. It's kind of a trend right now. And you start doing this particular job. And according to Diego, you can make the revenue you can make on these particular jobs is $900 per week on average. And it's a decent income if you're arriving to the United States, especially in New York, so you can barely make ends meet with these particular jobs. However, since they have to pay the rented platforms to this particular third person, and also they have to pay for the motorcycles and the bicycles and that kind of stuff, at the end, according to Diego, they get a net income of $300 per week. Way lower, but still, since you already have an accommodation, the ones who already have an accommodation, not all, in New York, still a decent amount. But remember, these people have to send money some of them have to send money back to Venezuela or back to another country in Latin America. Now, here's the issue. What starts happening? These motorcycles or these bicycles, some sort of these particular vehicles, they are not proper registered, so they are on a loophole over there, so they are not 100% legal for New York standards, and many times are impounded. Now here, one of the first issues regarding problems with the authority for these particular migrants and the people from New York City, a gang of 14 Venezuelans, they were robbing people using these particular bikes and bicycles, that kind of stuff, robbing cell phones to New York City citizens. Okay, so they were reported 14 people from over 100,000 Venezuelans, 14 people were arrested after 62 cases of cell phone robbery. And of course, these people should be prosecuted and be punished by law and afterwards be deported. Believe me, I completely agree. However, the scandal, this media scandal around Venezuelans started with this particular case. And of course, there are a handful of other Venezuelan delinquents in New York City, and these people should be prosecuted and then deported. I agree 100%. However, the city of New York started impounding these particular bikes and bicycles and that kind of stuff. And listen what happened. These 40,000 bikes and bicycles and so on were, after being impounded, they were destroyed by New York City. And remember, most of these particular vehicles were lended to Venezuelans. So these particular Venezuelans have another issue of not only just arriving to the country without still having the whole paperwork because the bureaucracy, the migration bureaucracy in the United States, and now they have to pay for those bikes. So it's another hurdle that these particular Venezuelan migrants have to go through. Now, regarding the other cases of Venezuelans causing mayhem in the United States, in New York City, in this particular case, some of the food delivery guys, they are not as, let's say, kind or respectful during the process. Maybe they drive recklessly throughout the city and that kind of stuff. That happens with a handful of them. Also, putting beside the people who are legally working decently in New York City, you have a small group of Venezuelans that assaulted and had a feud with local authorities, police officers, and these people, yet again, prosecuted, arrested, and then deported. I agree this 100%. And also a couple of robberies, a small petty theft that have happening in New York City by Venezuelans, newly migrant Venezuelans. And it was a case of a 15-year-old guy that with a gun and did some sort of mayhem with a Brazilian citizen. A female got shot by this guy, and of course, those handful of cases should be prosecuted, arrested, and then deported. You have my back, New York City citizens, you guys have my back on this particular regard. However, now we have to talk about racism and xenophobia by Americans. And of course, everything that I'm saying here comes from Diego Saul Reina. I'm going to leave the description below. His content that is in Spanish, so you can check it for yourself. However, I'm going to add something here. It comes from me. I know the United States is a beautiful country. U.S. people, actually, I love people from the U.S. I don't care if they are Democrat or Republican or liberal or conservative. I deal with all of them. In most cases, these people are very cool people. I met people from New York, from Texas, from Florida, from California. Cool people. Most Americans are very cool people. However, this is something, and also I've been in New York a handful of times. Have a picture here on Times Square. And well, but the main issue is that in the United States, there are a lot of cases, and let's be real, of racism, xenophobia, and basically mistreatment to people from abroad. Those are a handful of people, but they have a lot of power on the social issues within the United States. So now I'm going to go with the information by Diego Saul Reina, is that around 150,000 Venezuelans arrived in New York City in the past couple of years, just 2 years, right after the pandemic. Very good. Now, also they mention a political feud between the New York City mayor and the Texas governor. Of course, if you don't know anything about U.S. politics, usually the New York City mayor is a Democrat, a left center-leaning Democrat, something that nature, and the Texas governor usually is a conservative right-wing politician. So you can see the feud. Okay, so the Texas governor was upset by the migrants that come from the southern border, because remember, Texas has a border with Mexico, and usually the governor in Texas, depending on who he is, most likely he will be a Republican and a conservative, don't like migrants. Very good, that's his thing, and of course he represents people that voted from him that also has the same mentality. Very good, nothing against that. So the New York City mayor decided, that is racism and that kind of stuff. So, okay, let's start sending a few of them to New York City. However, this particular news about the handful of cases that, of course, that are dreadful and should not be tolerated. However, this particular news started getting a lot of traction and buzzwords on conservative media, especially on Fox News. In case if you are not from the United States, Fox News is a right-wing conservative news outlet that is watched mostly by the right-wing people, conservative people in the United States. And of course, they have some journalists that some of them are good journalists, but they like to use this particular political propaganda that is right-wing conservative. They have good analysis. Actually, I watch Fox Business every now and then, but they have, of course, their particular bias. In the particular case of Fox News is a right-wing conservative bias. So a handful of these particular cases have been exaggerated in the Fox News, in this particular mainstream media platform, and that created a lot of unease on the American population and the conservative population, a handful of them, and also some people from New York City. Now let's go with the public spending that the city of New York has on migrants. According to, yet again, Fox News, is $1 billion per year, and that was the figure of 2023. But here's the deal. It's not like the Venezuelan migrants are receiving money. This particular money, this figure of 1 billion, is not straight up in cash. Here's what happens, and that's why you have to keep an eye on the politicians. These particular places, the shelters that the Venezuelan migrants are staying, they're in actually very nice locations in New York City, close to Central Park and close to Times Square. So if you know New York, you know those are prime real estate locations. However, these particular buildings are actually outdated. They are very old. They are on renovations and that kind of stuff. And of course, you have to pay a lot of money. The owners of these particular buildings have to pay a lot of money on taxes and utilities and that kind of stuff. And they are not making any kind of money. So what happens, and this is everything I'm saying here is explained by Diego, most of this video, by the way, is that they have a particular arrangement between the politicians of New York City, and what they are doing is the city is giving some tax breaks and some tax benefits and regulations, that kind of stuff, to the owners of these particular buildings, especially, of course, the buildings itself. And meanwhile, they are renovated because they are not fitted in order to serve as a particular commercial service like renting or putting a hotel or an Airbnb on this particular location, that kind of stuff. So these particular properties are not suited in order to have a professional business over there. But the regulation regarding where the migrants can stay is more loosely. So they are kind of in bed with the local politicians in New York City. So at the end, these particular buildings are receiving subsidies and tax breaks, and that's in order, of course, in exchange for receiving the particular Venezuelan migrants. So let's sum it up, everything that Diego Saúl Reina said in this particular video. First, the logistics of traveling from Venezuelans to traveling to the United States, especially New York City, is very dreadful, expensive. Very good. Afterwards, some of them have particular debts in order to pay for this particular logistics process and migration process. Very good. They arrived to New York City, and in New York City, since you know the bureaucratic process of the Social Security and the working permit, that kind of stuff, they cannot legally aspire for a decent job in New York City, so they have to work on these food delivery platforms. Very good. Afterwards, they have to go using this particular vehicles like bikes and bicycles and that kind of stuff in order to do the food delivery, that kind of stuff. A few of those 150,000 Venezuelans, just a handful of them, have committed crimes and petty crimes, and actually they have some issues with authorities and that kind of stuff, and that should not be tolerated. Very good. Afterwards, the people that are racist and xenophobic and their platforms and that kind of stuff from the United States, platforms like Fox News have increased this negative sentiment against Venezuelans that already happened as well. And also the politicians in New York City, they have some arrangement with the owners of this particular very well located buildings, but yet all buildings that are not suited in order to host commercial businesses and that kind of stuff, and that already happened. And the opinion of Diego Saúl Reina is that the Venezuelans, these particular Venezuelans that have committed crimes in the United States, that are a very tiny majority, especially in the New York City, this particular video, should be deported. Yes, prosecuted, deported, arrested, all of the legal stuff. Yes, that should happen. Now, it's fair that you have all of this particular racism and xenophobia against the average Venezuelan? No. Particular is his opinion. He's a Mexican Canadian. He's not Venezuelan, by the way. But I, as a Venezuelan, I have a big issue because I'm a Venezuelan as well, and I don't like to be related with this kind of people, criminals, and that kind of stuff. So I don't like these people, but it's not fair. Well, I know the word is not fair to be accused as a criminal because some right-wing people, conservative people, think that should be fair. I'm not neither in the left in the right, by the way, just in case. And I have friends, both Democrats and Republicans, and I have clients, both Democrats and Republicans, both very cool people, but still don't like racism and xenophobia.
Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media. If you want to work with us, VenezuelaInsider.com. Thanks again and have a nice day.